think, good and useful types of stressors to be looking at. In terms of response variables, well, they have the same characteristics as stressors. They relate to management goals, predictive capabilities, and they relate to ecosystem and public health. Things that are interesting response variables could be things like keystone species, which are known to produce feedbacks within ecosystems, or ecological engineers, which do the same types of things. And so some examples of really good response variables would be percent macrophyte covering lakes, or chlorophyll A, hypoluminic oxygen, razor biomass. We were just hearing about kappa E and their ability to potentially clear the phytoplankton in lakes. Other sorts of response variables there as well. So these sorts of response variables are what I think are useful ones, and I think that what they really highlight is a question: are we measuring the right things effectively to manage our lakes? If this is the kind of framework we should be looking at, are the things that we're managing actually really going to help us? Sorry, the things that we're measuring really going to help us manage the lakes. As you can see from this, or as you can imagine, there isn't a lot of this sort of information available widespread across New Zealand lakes, but I'll talk about 3 examples where I think implicitly stressor response relationships have been used to help manage lakes in New Zealand. And one is the Lake Taupo example with the nitrogen cap. And I probably don't need to go into the details about this. I talk about this to people who aren't familiar with the New Zealand situation. But we know in Taupo we've got this nitrogen cap that's being brought in to help manage eutrophication in the lake. And what's interesting is when you look at the evidence underlying that nitrogen cap idea, you see that we've got some stressors here, which are in the catchment, like stocking rate and nitrogen yield from the catchment, which are clearly linearly correlated. And then we have the total nitrogen in the lake, biomass in the lake, again linearly correlated. And I think this is a really good example of where the stressor response relationship that was implicitly found for this lake is very linear. It's not, doesn't have tipping points, doesn't seem to have thresholds. It seems to behave in a very linear way, and that's being embedded in the way that management has come about for this lake. The second example is Waitunga Lagoon at Southland, which is a lagoon that is a shallow coastal lagoon intermittently open to the sea. 80% of its catchment is in dairy farming. And the keystone species in this lagoon is the seagrass rupia. It's being identified as being a key factor to maintaining lagoon health. And similar lagoons around the South Island and the North Island have lost their seagrass communities due to eutrophication. So there's quite some concern about this vulnerability of this lagoon to intense dairy farming catchment. And so some work was done funded by Environment Southland, and many of my science colleagues were involved in this work. And one of the streams of work was really looking at how aerial nitrogen loading relates to seagrass health in lagoons, in particular Waitunga, but we were looking in this case at lagoons and similar systems around the world to see what kind of information we could glean from the literature. And what we found was that there were indeed these tipping points, these collapse points, where seagrasses really just did not exist when nitrogen loading was above a threshold, which was usually around 100 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare per year. So this really implied that there's some kind of tipping point, some kind of point of collapse of seagrasses in the system, and these types of systems related to nitrogen loading. And indeed, so that was then embedded in a report that was produced to try to look at maintaining nitrogen loading levels below a certain threshold in that lagoon. The last example I'm going to show you is Lake Hayes, which is a 2.8 kilometer square lake, 31 meters deep, eutrophic since the 1960s. And it has historically had a high internal phosphorus load, but this has been increasing in recent times, from about 1982 through to 2014. The phosphorus in the bottom waters during the summer is about half. And so we had this problem, this situation of decreasing load of phosphorus, but what's been happening is the second depth in this lake has actually been getting worse in recent times. There was a real downturn here in the mid-2000s. And so people were scratching their heads as to what was going on. And what gave us a clue was that at the same time, in occasional years, there would be extremely high water clarity, historically high water clarity in this lake. What is going on? The locals were wondering, why is this lake coming up? And what I think is happening in this lake is that this lake is in the recovery phase, and it's entering into bifurcation, where it's flipping back and forth between two states. And so, just to summarize those different ideas, in Lake Toco we have this idea that linear stress-response relationship is governing eutrophication. In Waitung Lagoon, we're very concerned about a threshold for seagrass collapse. And in Lake Hayes, what we have here is a lake that was degraded, recovering, and is here inside this sort of zone of phosphorus stability where it's flipping back and forth. And so I think the stress response idea is really helpful in terms of getting us thinking in different ways about how lakes function and how they should be managed. And one useful way here is in relation to restoration planning as well. So if you think of lakes as being affected by stresses and having responses, you can think of restoration, different restoration strategies. One would be to decrease the stressor level, so you could just reduce the load. The other could be to increase resistance, so to enhance the grazers in the lake. Another could be to increase the response value, so you can plant higher into the lake. So this way of thinking can be really helpful. And finally, just a couple of challenges that we face in just taking this further. And one is that we really need accurate measurements of good stressors and response variables for our lakes. We need to then be able to identify the thresholds that exist. And I think it's really important to be able to account for stochasticity or high frequency variations that occur due to climate and things like that within these types of relationships. At the moment, I'm doing some work trying to develop a typology for lakes, where certain types of lakes may be more susceptible and may be more likely to have certain types of stress and response relationships, which can help with our management. And then I think we need to be looking at how to extend this framework that I presented into N dimensions to bring multiple stressors into it. And Martin Shepard has already done some work in that area, and I don't think that's a big issue for So with that, I'll thank you for listening, and be happy to talk about it. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. How you can see things a bit at the top of the page. Just let's see that it works. And that's what was great. See by into law school, whilst in account, whilst in study sites. And like Hayes, two study sites in Canada, I was looking at exams, then he's doing a PhD and the lecture to his program. Thanks, Kevin. Some of all these past presentations, like most of my country is correct. I will go very fast. You have seen them everywhere. So I'm talking about that how we can do the continuous dynamics use as a binary I'm studying Lake Hayes. Today I was focused on Lake Hayes. I was thinking that I would also present Lake Johnson at the time. I was a bit constrained. It's a lake which was also presented in Lake Hayes. It is call it eutropic lake, some people call it control, but yeah. And there is a bit of history of the lake with the food web companies. And in 1850s, we see that the lake was really in healthy condition. There was a natural population of eels, coral, and there was a native definitely. And what happened almost like 30 years after that, maybe after the European arrival there, introduced two dam fish in the lake. The lake was still in very good condition. And almost like 100 years after that, when there was excessive nutrients, when they started adding into the lake somehow started showing poor health condition. And in 1958 was the first time that the lake was reported that there is an algae, cyanobacteria, the harmful algae that there was in blue. In 1968 was reported that the lake has a very a loss of the nutrient, which explains that it's a very worse condition, and I think that was the time when the lake became eutrophic. And apart from nutrients, what was happening there was another fishing competition, and big fish was taken out of the lake, and a very big number, I think that was called first the first contribution. The lake was remained a very extended population for a number of years, and I think in 2000 it was reported that the lake has very few numbers of the five fish and a bundle of fish extended for the relaxation. At the same time, it was reported that there is an invasive species of that which is called just the invasive species, and also oxidation, which was which took over and became an abundant alga of the lake. So there was no salinity bloom, which was replaced by organic material from oxidation. In 2010, it was reported that the lake was fairly in good water quality, and therefore I would rank it that somehow the lake was giving better at its health. And the same was repeated in 2016. So there were two clear water states in the lake in the past decade. So now we know that there are no harmful organisms in the lake, and the nutrients level, as I said, it was also reduced to a very like limit level in 2000, and this is like there is like still some blooms, but it is not from harmful algae, like harmful algae, but there is another algae called like and and there is no persistence of bacteria behavior in summer. But when there is a strong, like a really a definite bacteria persistence in summer, we see that there are more, there is high water clarity. And this whole picture explains that there is a trophic cascade, and which is interfering with the lake. From the recovery. Before that, we said that I think one also said this Martin's paper model is that this alternate says that we see that in most of our lakes, because they were basically shallow lakes, but which may be true for the deep lakes, that they somehow show these non-linear relationship, and there is kind of like threshold behavior. So we know that there were like the food web was altered, there was specific nutrients added into the lake, but still the lake was showing a very good. Which at some stage reached a level which is unknown, not important on that. So if we know that there is threshold, and after that actually the zooplankton actually can't really like control the algae by more grazing, and that's when actually the system collapses. And But what we see here, that when the lake is actually showing this buffer capacity, it is because that there is more bicycles and grazers there. This reverse phenomena is happening when we are actually restoring our lakes or whether the lakes are recovering by nature. So, and this is just because that we know that when there was this alternate set of states, during this, it showed this buffer capacity where there is high plankton or fish, which will somehow control the presence, and that's why just because of this trophic cascade, we see that there is a high phytoplankton biomass in our lakes. This phase where we see our lakes is somehow in this physics phase, which was explained in a couple of talks. And we think that this stage can actually be reduced if we go for biomodulation. And this biomodulation, what we will be doing is if we control the plankton or fish and increase the bicycles or increase the grazer population, that will somehow decrease the species. Another hypothesis which somehow will explain our lake situation is that it's called trophic cascade hypothesis. And this hypothesis states that the productivity level of each lake is somehow established by the nutrients level. But the deviation of that system from that particular state is just because of the food aggression. And if we see here that if we give more bicycle fish, it will control the primary producer by the enzyme linkages, and which is the opposite here. We went to that head and we were sampling the heads for 2 years, and we just wanted to see whether we see this trophic cascades physically there. And we were sampling the heads for monthly, and what we see here is that when the perch actually starts spawning in this in early spring, so in 2016 there was a very successful perch spawning. And what we see that almost in summer, the lake was blue and perch. And if you see that this orange line is water clarity, and the blue bar shows delta population, if you see that there is a strong negative correlation. So when the delta population, which is controlled by the perch, and our water clarity decreases. In 2017, we had still enough juvenile perch, and when for some reason there was not a successful spawning, and we see that the lake actually started becoming more clearer, even that in this time of the year. Last year it was quite lower clarity. Last year and this year, what we see here that again before perch spawning, the lake was quite blue water, like there was a high clarity. There was 1 month that we decided bullfrogs actually started growing, and bullfrogs just came from out of the blue because they were not even regarded in the 3 years in the phytoplankton community. They were here, but in a very small number. And for some reason, it just got blue. And you could see like this, there was blue plankton samples from that month. And this is like how the blue was like. So it just dropped, and then it just didn't even stay for like 1 month, after 3 weeks, it was gone off the lake. So the lake went back to this pure water state, and then perch started spawning, and we see that the cascade happened again. So another question which will come to mind is, okay, we are thinking about this water quality, and then we are thinking about sedation and definite interaction. Actually, how much of the phytoplankton population is abundant, like phytoplankton is from sedation biomass. So there are actually 25 alga species in our lakes, and what we see that out of those 25, 85% biomass is actually coming from this one dinoflagellate, which is quite high and which is quite consistent, throughout the year. And when there is actually this cascade happening. Yeah, so why would pulp actually spawn in one or the other year? We just don't know, but internationally it has been recorded that pulps are actually, they're actually very frequent spawner. So this is one of the black horn, and also like Eddie, what actually they studied, they somehow found that actually short and warm winter actually affect their reproduction of pulps. So after a cold winter, your eggs are actually in big numbers and quite, and also the larvae are quite in good healthy condition. So maybe that's also the case, but we still don't know. And why is actually trout here in the lake, and that's not helping because we know that in summer the lake water in the Union is quite warm for the trout, and that's why they just remain in the cold water even though there is not enough oxygen for them, and that's why the perch thrive very well. We did this grazing experiment because it was very unlikely that Daphne is actually grazing on this big dinoflagellates. We did one experiment, and if time allows, I will play the video. But we just found out that actually the Daphne, they just enter the whole cells inside their carapace, and with the help of their claw, they just break those big cells and take the plasma out of, through a process called methylation, not taking the whole cell intake. And maybe it's just because that this invasive species in their claw, they have these spines, which maybe helps them to breaking the cells. Yeah, so now we see that from our lake, there are lack of piscine fish, which is a big problem, and there are like stranded perch population. What others see is that perch is actually fecal spawner, and that's why we see these intermittent clear water years in our lakes. Definitely in the area, when it persists in summer, actually we see that there is high water clarity, and we think that if we somehow maintain that abundance in our lake, that would increase our lake's resilience and also induce or accelerate our recovery. Next, I'm doing that. I'm using semi-isotopes and fatty acids for just to see that whether this trophic cascade in which month of the year is very strong, and also to see whether whether there is direct or indirect linkages. I would like to thank my supervisor, Mark Carol Byrne, and also MD for the grant, Nathan from the ORC, and also the other colleagues from the ORC, 2000 ORC, and then Roger who actually allowed me to use for sample from 2016. And thank you very much for listening.
When I see you see this video, just stick around, but lunch is outside, so if you want to break for lunch, that's fine as well, but certainly we'll show us video, and we'll aim to reconvene at 12 and run through it. Is that right, Paul?
Not off the top of my head, sorry, but yes.
Yeah, okay. So thank you very much. section on emerging research areas. And so first up, we're going to hear about the my introduction to some of the advancements in that. So yeah, Mike.
Thanks to everyone who's been jumping around Takuara over the last wee while. I'd just like to acknowledge David Hamilton, who brought us in really early in the piece of the program and had a vision around how can we start to collect in the outputs of all the science and the modelling that you guys are all doing. And one, how can we share that across the system, but two, how might we multiply the outputs and outcomes of what we've been working on. To see the outputs today and some of the things throughout the day are just mind-blowing. So I want to go through and show, we've spent the last 12 months doing version 2.0 platform, which nobody has seen yet, apart from some of the guys who've been testing it internally. But I just want to acknowledge guys, Chris McBride, Chris Eager, Matt, Alan, and Vicky Maui Hudson, who Maui and I, and both of us have been working on finding ways to make sure that the science and the stuff that's coming through this program and others is able to explain to the hands of the Māori organisations. And there's some amazing stories come through and results come through from those out there who are starting to build their own capability and knowledge base and understanding of what some of the science coming through freshwater quality and so I'll go through one of the key kind of objectives was to say, how do we make sure that the data and information that's coming through is useful not just to you guys and your peers across the system, but how do we get it through and not just in policy, but into the hands of people at the front line who make decisions every day about what they farm, how they farm, what's the impact of their farming on freshwater, for instance. I'm going to take you through an example of like an attachment scale of what this is starting to look like. And just knowledge Troy and I did a project with DFE last year, Uptech Spring, and we started to look at what the, could we get a farm scale, attachment scale view on the whole of the different perspectives from above the ground, below the ground, from space, from in the water, the iwi cultural data and information, can we get a more roundabout view of what's going on down at the farm attachment scale in a way that might start to tell us some of the information asymmetries that exist between, say in this case, iwi and Māori organisations trying to look after the land as best they can, whether through farming or RMA staff and consent process or co-governance arrangements between iwi and Crown or regional council or whoever. And we really tried to push the boat to say, how can we level that playing field so that iwi and Māori do have access to some of the information, notwithstanding the fact that we're still building our own capability from a science perspective to deeply understand, but we've seen some quite amazing things when they start engaging with the data. So here's the Ruahulu catchment. It's top of the Waikato River. You guys know that the quality of the water that flows out the end of the lake here through Taupo Gates flows all the way down through Port Waikato. It bears no resemblance to the top of the river by the time it gets to the river mouth, right? We know that. But there's no resemblance 5 k's down from one of these gates. And there's a whole lot of reasons for that. So what we've been doing is working with the Taurua River Iwi Trust to try and understand what's going on from a non-science perspective, if you like. The beautiful thing about this now is you guys have been building science, and with this post-process satellite data that Brits has been working on, this thing, the Brits were starting us down the journey on saying, how do we get that post-process stuff, put colours into it, and so we can get it on the screen so people can see what's happening to their lakes, what the lakes look like in space. And it's also in that stuff this morning from the The thing about this catchment is multiple stakeholders. So Wairakei Estate, 28,000, and Bunch Auckland invested for 28,000 hectares of land in there, converted half of that from forest to dairy. The Waikato River comes out and runs right through the middle of that land and carries on. So we've been working with owners of that land because they know from the governance and investor perspective they've got some serious challenges around the land use and the impact of the nitrogen inputs it's having on the river right now. And that's only going to get worse from here unless something changes. There's a whole bunch of my freehold land in there, working with some of those farmers right now. Landcorp is the operator of that private land owned by Wairakei Estates. The farmer is operating around that. There's a dairy in there, so we've got these amazingly complex dynamic issues and tensions going on in this sector right now. We're trying to get a better handle on, have conversations that are data-driven. I'm going to zoom through this really quickly. I can't even see what's on the screen if you've got the glasses, so I'm just going to make this up. Metadata. Well, I could. This comes from Alerts data. Comes out of Alerts DB. The guys have been working on it for years. We've got all that data in there, metadata around sunlight, it's got the NMP levels, we've got DO and a whole bunch of other parameters in there. There's label Hakuri at the top of the picture. They've got the basic data sets, Topo, the source stuff. You guys know all this is familiar to you. There's freely available Waikato Regional Council data. I'm just going to zoom through quickly. The point is, depending on where we want to look into now within that catchment down there, even at farm scale, the data exists for us to sit down and drill in and navigate what's going on both at farm and do that out to get a more strategic view. Here's our Māori freehold land. You can see that dotted around in the blue around the river. So you can see the river there, it runs up around to north. We're just going to focus on the catchment. In here we've got on-farm data, so this is some of the Landcorp stuff. We can see the input numbers for nitrogen, for example. So we know now just how much nitrogen is going on just those farms. Not even looking at the Māori freehold and below, their levels aren't too similar. There's massive amount of tons of nitrogen being poured on these farms right now. Right, you've got to be productive, you've got to be able to keep the wheels turning. This is the dominant farming practice that we're becoming accustomed to as a nation. And in here we can start to see where WRC, Tarawera, Iwi Trust, private landowners have sent water monitoring sites in here. Now the WRC sites at the moment, data from sensors are collected, data is collected manually at the moment. As far as we're aware, research has recently changed. And but the challenge here is that we've got all this dynamic stuff going on, and then the government comes out with something like this that says in 5 years, there's going to be a noticeable improvement in fresh water quality. And we just look at that catchment. We're saying this data is an absolute waste of time unless we can translate that into better decision making. It's going to get us to this position in 5 years' time. Right now we're in a milestone. It's going to be worse, not better. So we put our own sensors in there now, so we're measuring real-time data off the river, off the tributary going to the Waikato, and we're starting to put more sensors into the river itself. And building Christmas Road at the moment, we'll get monitors in Mohakuri and we'll start to get a better view of what's going on. We've got radar, satellite and radar planes in there now, so we can start to get a bird's eye view of what's happening. And the amazing thing is blowing me away with what Susie and Marcus and the lakes reality has been doing. It's not just looking for stuff in space anymore. We can see what's happening on the ground in real life. And if anyone has to see it, don't have to look on the table. Lake Wilbegu, full sample, you can see Lake Tarawera eruption. A chunk of scoria, black scoria in there that came out of that mountain sitting on the table country. That was just mind blowing. When we get that over to Pakiwa, we can see space and what's coming out of the ground in real life. This is Chris McBride mentioned that this is the world leading technology at the moment. Fluid Arizona and electrophoresis technology. It's the bomb detector stuff they're using airports. So we're getting nitrate and nitrogen down to 15 parts per billion. So that's data coming off the river right now, nitrogen. And it's sitting right in the middle of those hot farming hotspots with the permission of the farmers around there. They're saying, collect the data, we need to know what's going on. And that's Chris's data off one of his boys. We'll get that. That's what we'll start to pull out of one of the lakes just down the street from these farms. Once we get this thing set up. That's what it looks like at Pakiwa at the moment. So we can start to pull all that data, 7 million data points on that view there. 8 years of data, multiple parameters, 15-minute samples, and you can go cut and dice that out there now. You jump on the machine, you can start to play around with the data, see what's going on at a more granular level. So the data is a waste of time unless we're starting to solve problems. So what we've been looking at is saying, well, how do we move away from this high-risk monoculture model that we've become accustomed to, and the one that we know now that science is out globally, it's being written into legislation in the States. Regenerative agriculture is a bit of a buzzword that's starting to be overused, but no more overused than kind of the farming model that we've been accustomed to and we've become stuck with. So This model here, we've got, we're looking at now where the science has been done, right, this soil holding together, you're going to get, when there's big climate events, when you get the big swings, this picture behind me down south, you can see the land behind it hasn't been treated, you can see the land in front of it has huge biodiversity going on above the ground and below the ground, the soils come back to life again. These guys, the guy this guy here, the farmer says, there's a sweet soil over the back, there's a soil that's life again and life again in front. It's pretty clear on here, you know, I don't know, I'm not a scientist, but I don't need to do with this one. If the wind tuck down the rain here, which one of these bits of blocks of land is going to wash more soil into the waterway? So it's a bit of the sedimentation we can start to get a bit of a view on that when you change the farming practice to these kinds of models. There's a list of all the different types of grass species to get the biodiversity back in, and there's some cows in there somewhere. So mustard becomes a bit of a challenge when you run these kinds of models, but it's kind of the the goal here is I'll just start with this is real data off the farm, off the overseer data, right? And you can see that big fat zero there. That's synthetic nitrogen inputs. There's nothing going on that farm. This guy's got an $8 million debt. He's now paying it off. He's building a more environmentally resilient farm model. He's not suffering from the big climate swings that he's going to continue to experience. His land is more resilient, his animals are healthier, he's now becoming more productive. He's starting to pay off his $8 million debt, which he's seriously stressed out about. And he's got a big fat zero in box where you have to say nitrogen for the farm. We're seeing guys across the country who are getting that about zero, they're getting their risk numbers down here. 7's pretty outstanding by all standards. Some of them are down to 30 by dropping to zero. Overseas still showing them as 30, but that's modeled. We know that it's going to be lower if it's not working. I think the amazing thing that we've been able to experience through this, and again what David and what Troy carried on with, is to be able to look at the science that you guys have been working on and pull some of that through. And there's so much more to it. If I had a data to show you what we're doing with the whole range of science. And how do we get this into the hands of people at the front line? When I show this raw stuff to farmers, it's the first time they've ever seen it. It's all in core samples in right. So soil is becoming, we've got to start farming soil, not animals. The sooner we start farming soil, the sooner we're going to hit that government target in 5 years' time. I've got to look after that soil. Stop. It's our biggest export at the moment. We've got to stop. And so at iwi right now, so just on that similar slide, Cattle River Iwi Trust had a co-governance meeting with the Crown about 3 weeks ago, and they used their slides from their screenshots off their platform to have a conversation with the Prime Minister and the Minister for the Environment and 3 other ministers. No, they didn't understand fully what the detailed, deep dive science was saying, but when we were at a high level, they could show the parts what we think is better and worse. They could have a different conversation, much more deeper than corridor around what's not just what's important, but all the cultural stuff in there too, right? A bunch of other things. Not just from a Mātauranga Māori or a iwi worldview perspective, but they could bring a little bit of the science that's really done at the corridor. And it kind of just leaves the playing field. Right? It's like government having a corridor with us about Mātauranga Māori stuff. We go, well, we have a go, and we really appreciate them for that, but we don't expect you to know all the things about what that is. That's our job. Same when we go back the other way. Right? So it's just, so I'm going to leave it at that. And then if anyone wants to come over to do out there on the machines, they're all set up, and thanks to Chris Eager and the guys who set all that up for us. It's a good time. So congratulations on the project, on the progress on the project. It's going to make a difference. It's going to change. It's really going to all right.
So next up is Maynard Dallenberg, who's one of the PhDs who's supported by the Lakes Resilience Program, which is going to be taking us back to the micro and talking about eco-farming experience.
most abundant photoautotrophs on Earth, and they're found upwards of 40,000 cells per mil in many of our lakes. So that's over 4,000 picocyanobacteria per drop of lake or ocean water. So you can think about that in a tiny splashing amount from that. This abundance of photosynthesis means that they can contribute up to 80% of primary productivity in some of our lakes. But very little is known about them. In particular, very little is known about their diversity, their ecological function, and how they might respond to change, so changes like climate change and increased nutrient loading. So I've sort of structured my research to look into these three main areas: diversity, function, and response to change. I'm looking into some new techniques like eDNA, which we've heard a lot about. I'm also looking into some of the limitations of these techniques on the right here. But I want to know whether this can shed some light on picocyanobacterial diversity and dynamics in a number of different lakes. I'm interested in whether this diversity and abundance that we see might be driven by certain environmental factors, so certain picocyanobacterial ecotypes exist. I'm interested in how strains from very different lake types function, so how can they survive and thrive in such different environments? And I'm also interested in how they might respond to changes like nutrient increases. So a couple of quick results here. This is looking at picocyanobacterial communities across different lakes. So each dot is a sample, each color is a different lake, and how closely the samples cluster together, the more similar the picocyanobacterial communities are. And right away we can see that lakes Wanaka, Wakatipu, and Te Anau cluster, you can't really see it because it's the flag, cluster closely together and actually share a number of dominant picocyanobacterial strains. Again, like Ellesmere clusters off to the side, so they have a very unique picocyanobacterial community. And Lake Hayes and Tomahawk Lagoon cluster kind of closely and actually share a few dominant taxa, which is quite interesting. They're very different lakes, but they're both prone to flipping from a clean to an unhealthy state. So these are some quite interesting results. Now we're just looking at picocyanobacterial abundances over the course of a year. So we can just focus on the black lines here to get the general trends. In Lake Wanaka and Lake Wakatipu, picocyanobacteria are present throughout the year, every single month, at quite high concentrations. So we're talking about 15,000 cells per mil. And Lake Wanaka, and this year in particular, showed a strong spring peak. The eutrophic lakes, on the other hand, are a real mixed bag. We have Lake Hayes and Tomahawk Lagoon, for example, that show abundance cycles sort of like booms and busts. So there will be months at a time where there are no picocyanobacteria present at all, and then all of a sudden, generally in summer, we'll see these big blooms. Lake Ellesmere, again, it's such a cool, unique lake. Picocyanobacteria are present throughout the whole year in this lake also, similar to the oligotrophic lakes, but they're at incredibly high abundances. So we're talking above 20 million cells per mil in Lake Ellesmere, which is higher than anything I've found in the literature. Another interesting thing I'm finding as I start to study more and more different lakes is that the photosynthetic pigments that these picocyanobacteria contain seem to be different between these two different lake types. So in the oligotrophic lakes, we have strains with the phycoerythrin. You can see them turning yellow here under autofluorescence. And in the eutrophic lakes, I'm seeing a lot of phycocyan-rich strains, which suggests that these picocyanobacteria are utilizing light at different wavelengths across these different lake types. So in some of my exciting next steps, I'm going to be sequencing some genomes of strains that I've isolated and cultured from very different lakes, so oligotrophic and eutrophic lakes. Sequencing the genomes will let me see what different functional genes these different strains have. So do they have genes that allow them to uptake different nutrients in these very different nutrient systems? And I'm also going to run some nutrient addition experiments, seeing how these different strains respond to nutrient enrichment. And these are just some, you can't quite see this one, some images of some of the strains that I've cultured from 6 different lakes so far. And again, we can really clearly here see the different pigment contents with these rosy colored oligotrophic strains and the green colored eutrophic strains. And yes, 5 minutes. Thank you. I hope I've shown you that picocyanobacteria are really a new and exciting emerging research area. And and I hope I'll get some more attention in the future. Thank you.
Thanks, Anna. Since you took up time, maybe I'll quiz for the day. Is there anyone that's got a question for Anna? Okay, I have a question.
Yeah.
So the green bus that you see in Eutrophic Lakes, Hayes and Humboldt, any ideas of what's causing those? So you can see it's going up rapidly in January. We might expect that to also be the last of the
Totally. So I've seen so far, I haven't seen all this different data, but I've seen so far that Anabaena blooms and other cyanobacterial blooms are also occurring often at those times, especially in Tomahawk Lagoon anyway. So there might be an association with some of the larger cyanobacteria there. But all of this is so unknown. So yeah, hopefully I'll start discovering some.
Very cool. So we're sticking with the theme of cyanobacteria now, and introducing Georgia Elaine Thompson, who's going to talk to us about some work that we've been doing with a new glycoside, a new way of sort of measuring glycoside.
Thanks. Yeah, so as Susie mentioned, I'm talking about a new tool to determine cyanobacterial abundance in lake water. And specifically, we've been using a handheld barometer to predict cyanobacterial biovolumes in a range of simple to complex cyanobacterial planktonic communities. So, as many of you may be aware, there are a range of lakes in New Zealand that experience periodic cyanobacterial blooms, often throughout the summer. And as a result of this, there are a number of guidelines that have been developed to determine at what thresholds we should take action. And these can be broken into green, amber, and red modes. And these determine whether sampling frequency increases, monitoring frequency increases, and also when notification to public health units and notification to the public to do with the health risk associated with toxins related to the cyanobacteria. These modes are defined by thresholds, and these thresholds are largely based on cyanobacterial biovolumes in the water. There are some limitations around this. Primarily, to get a biovolume, you take water samples, do cell counts, and ID the bacterial species in the samples, and this is therefore costly. You need expertise, and it's time-consuming, and these results are being delayed. So this has led us to investigate using phycocyanin as a proxy for cyanobacterial biovolumes. Phycocyanin, as I mentioned, is a cyanobacterial specific pigment. And there have been a number of trials using handheld sensors that have tested the relationship between phycocyanin fluorescence that we can measure with probes and the biovolumes of cyanobacteria in the samples. And the outcomes of these studies have shown that there are pretty strong relationships between phycocyanin and the biovolumes in the samples, and this has been done looking at single strain cyanobacterial species samples as well as field samples from lakes. However, using these sensor probes, there have also been limitations, such as low sensitivity. So we've been able, previously they've been able to find accurate phycocyanin readings, but above alert thresholds for biovolumes. And we've had issues with precision. So replicate variability, differences in precision between different strains and different strain morphologies, and also a reduced precision in complex communities. So the main aim of this study was to assess whether a handheld barometer would be more effective as to measure phycocyanin as a proxy for biovolume. And I come prepared with a prop, and this is our handheld barometer that we tested, and it was designed by Turner Designs in America, and it's called the Cyanid Wheel. And this is the method we employed to test this. Essentially, we had took a sample, we did a filtered blank to determine environmental background. Then we looked at cells when they were not lysed, the sample not lysed, and then a lysed sample to try to make the sample more homogeneous. And then essentially, it's a very simple process. You put water into a cuvette, 4 mils, and you put it in the machine, read it, and after 30 seconds, less than 30 seconds, you get raw fluorescence reading of phycocyanin. And then using a conversion factor, you can then convert this to phycocyanin concentration. So initially we focused on looking at cyanobacterial strains in single species. So these were lab-based strains, and we looked at 12 strains in a range of morphologies. And we took known biovolumes and created dilution series, which we then assessed the relationship between phycocyanin fluorescence or concentration that we measured and the non-biovolume in the sample. So here I just present one example, which is a colonial microcystis strain. And the 2 lines are when the cells are lysed and not lysed. And we get a really strong relationship between biovolume and phycocyanin, so an R-squared value of over 0.9, and across all of our strains we actually got R-squared score above 0.8. And lysing the cells reduced variability between replicates by up to 80%. Perhaps importantly is looking at species-specific phycocyanin. So although all the relationships were really strong, we did see a huge diversity in phycocyanin per biovolume depending on the species. So across the bottom is a log scale, and you can see, depending on the cyanobacterial species, you get a huge range of phycocyanin per biovolume of that species, which could prove an issue if you have a lake community with a range of different species. And so we wanted to do field testing of this method, and so we focused on 4 lakes in the Darugpuni region, and these were Rotorua, Rotoiti, Rotoahu, and Karo, and these all experienced different levels of cyanobacterial blooms. And so this is just an image showing 4 different lakes over the 12 weeks that we took samples last summer. And this is showing biovolumes that we counted and the composition of different species in of these biovolumes. And so you can see there's quite a diversity between the lakes. And some lakes, such as Lake Rotoahu, is primarily dominated by 2 species, whereas other lakes have more of a mixed composition. So I'll take you through this graph. Up the top, we have total biovolume in the black line, and again, the scales are logged, so there's large variation between the lakes. But what is more important is below in the blue line, we see the phycocyanin we measured in relation to the total biovolume in each sample. And so you can see for most of the lakes, we get pretty good relationships between the phycocyanin and the biovolumes across time. Rotoiti was a bit less of a strong relationship, but this was also because many of the data points were below our sensitivity limit or lower limit of quantification. So putting this in the context of alert thresholds, this graph shows all the samples from all the lakes and the relationship between biovolume and the phycocyanin concentration measured by the cyanoflora. And you can see that R-squared values of both lysed and non-lysed samples show really strong relationships. And if we take threshold biovolumes that are stated in guidelines, such as 0.5 and 1.8, and then read the phycocyanin concentrations of them, we can see that they fall within the accurate linear range that we can measure. And so it shows that this machine is sensitive enough to potentially use phycocyanin as a proxy for these biovolumes. So in conclusion, we've found in progression from previous work using other sensors that the handheld barometer shows a strong biovolume and phycocyanin relationship. And overall, when we lysed samples, it reduced variability, although non-lysed samples still showed strong relationships. This is really interesting because this is the first time we've seen really high sensitivity in relation to guideline thresholds, which are useful for potentially early warning. though it is important to understand that the phycocyanin per bite volume is both strain and lake specific, so there is potential that you require an underlying knowledge of what species are in the lake to get an accurate assessment of the phycocyanin to bite volume relationship. But this seems to be a promising tool for rapid on-site cyanobacterial assessment, and you can use it lakeside, and it could potentially provide immediate information about the cyanobacterial content in the lake. So I want to thank James and Judy from Bay of Plenty Regional Council for providing samples from the lakes and the funders. Thanks for listening.
Do you have any ideas on the process that's driving that? And is it some of the material that's associated outside the cell that's actually stopping the light, or is it, do you think it's within the cell that's stopping the fluorescence back to the cells?
You mean the difference between?
Between the lights and the...
Oh yeah, I think it's just, I'm not quite sure, but lysine really increased the content of phycocyanin in the sample, so I'm assuming that it's just releasing phycocyanin to be more easily accessible to read. But for all of them, we removed any background phycocyanin.
Next one, I believe it's also, so I'm going to say follow this next one. It's about some of the work you've been involved to take the question.
Hi everyone, my name is Melissa and I'm going to be talking to you a bit about Chetron dogs and their ability to detect invasive fish. Before I begin, I just want to acknowledge that this project was funded by the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment for a 3-year period. And yeah. First off, I thought I'd start off with a few aims of my project. So first we want to determine if dogs can be used to detect invasive fish and whether or not they can be used as a viable survey and monitoring technique. We also want to aim to compare the sensitivity of dogs to eDNA or environmental DNA and volatile organic compound analysis. So here are a few people that are involved in the project. We have Dr. Claire Brown, Tim Edwards, and Tim Edwards, who specialise in animal behaviour. We have Nick Lean, Grant Tempero, and Ian Kusevs, who are freshwater biologists. And we have Patrick Saluk, who is a chemist, and Diane Gleason, who is an environmental DNA specialist. So, no doubt the majority of you guys know a bit about koi carp, but I thought for those of you who don't, it might as well do a brief background. So koi carp are native to Europe and Asia. They were first introduced to New Zealand in the early 1960s, and although it hasn't been confirmed, we thought that they were accidentally brought here during the goldfish consignment. So now for a population of koi carp widely distributed throughout the North Island of New Zealand, and particularly they're quite abundant in the Waikato region. The koi carp are considered a problem as they reduce water clarity, they reduce the abundance of submerged aquatic plants, increase nutrient loads, and compete with native species for food resources and habitat. So at the moment we have 3 primary methods that are used to detect koi carp for invasive fish species, and these are netting, electrofishing, and environmental DNA. So although these methods can be effective, they either require a lot of manpower or are quite expensive to implement. So now I'll talk a bit about my project. So basically, this project is entirely laboratory based. All water samples are collected from the aquatic lab and brought to the centre detection facility where they present to the dogs using a specialised apparatus. So in my project we have 5 dogs, or I have 5 dogs. These dogs are just household pets that come into the centre detection laboratory for a day and then they just go home at night, once a week. So having this arrangement reduces any ethical issues regarding housing of the dogs. It is relatively low cost in terms of the research project, and it promotes community engagement and awareness about current conservation issues. Okay, so this is the scent detection apparatus that we use for for our trials. I'll describe it briefly to you guys now, but I'll also show you a video which will demonstrate or illustrate what I'm saying a bit better. So this leak detection apparatus is one of a kind. It's found nowhere else in the world. As you can see, it contains 17 removable segments, and it is fully automated. The water samples, either positive, so those containing fish scent, or negative, containing no fish scent, are randomly allocated to each segment and presented to the dog using a report at the front of the apparatus. So, if it is a positive sample, the dog will hold their nose in the port for 5 seconds, and then they will get rewarded using an automated feeder. If it is a negative sample, the dog will take their nose out of the port and switch a lever, which will rotate the carousel and present the dog with another sample. Here's the video. So this is Cassie, one of our scent detection dogs, and with an apparatus. This is a positive sample to hold their nose in, and then it's rewarded with a treat and using a feeder, which you can't quite see in this video. He then comes back to the apparatus with the nose in, takes out, switches the lever, which rotates to a next sample, puts the nose in again, takes out a negative sample, and then again a positive sample by holding her nose in the port. And then takes out the water. Cool. So at the moment we're currently looking at dilutions, or the detection limit of dogs. So this graph demonstrates some of the most recent results that I have obtained from Ruby, one of my dogs in my study, who is working with samples containing 100 mils of control water, so no fish scent, spiked with 0.4 mils of water containing koi carp, or goldfish scent, which is equivalent to 1,550 kg per hectare. The red line shows how accurate Ruby was when evaluating samples containing koi scent. The black line shows how accurate she was when evaluating samples with no fish scent. And the grey line shows how accurate Ruby was when evaluating samples with goldfish scent. So, basically, the goldfish scent in this study is used as a negative because we wanted to determine whether or not dogs could discriminate between the scent of koi carp and the scent of a closely related species, which, as you can see from this graph, it can do so quite nicely. So although we are currently looking at dilutions and how low dogs can detect koi carp at, we also have a lot of other research that will be conducted as a part of this project. For example, we will compare dog detection performance to environmental DNA. We will determine the impact of different preservation techniques on water samples and determine if this influences the detection performance of dogs. We'll perform chemical analysis on scent samples to determine what odors are present in the water samples. And finally, we will determine if dogs have the ability to detect specific invasive fish species in naturally sourced water. So I just want to elaborate on the last point a little bit. So we want to go out and want to collect water from ponds and lakes, around the Waikato region or around New Zealand, and see whether or not dogs are still able to detect koi carp specifically in those samples, because they contain quite a lot more noise in terms of scent in comparison to the query water which we're currently using. So if this research proves successful, water samples will be sent from large organisations such as iwi, the Department of Conservation, or regional councils for evaluation by dogs. It will be a cheap yet effective method for fish detection, as it won't require the expensive equipment and time that other methods do require. All that we will need is pet dogs, fish, and a scent detection apparatus. Thank you for listening to the presentation.
and that's part of my PhD research. I should acknowledge my supervisors, and of course they're not responsible for anything I say as well. So I have key areas of my PhD research looking at characterising the drivers of the communities of shallow lakes. And I'm particularly interested in the abiotic drivers such as nutrients and the biotic drivers as well, such as food and food. A big part of that is looking at quantifying the trophic relationships between fish species within these lakes and across lakes that have different fish assemblages or different fish communities, and also lakes that have varying modification for use of phosphonaphtholites and things like that. And as what I'm presenting to you today is really some preliminary analysis related to this examination of trophic relationships. So in terms of my methodology when catching fish, for those of you that know me, you'll be surprised I've been out doing a lot of fishing lately. So far, I work in the Wellington region for the Wellington Regional Council, so my work is based in lakes and lagoons in the Wellington region. Lawrence, I was a bit shocked to see the colour of Lake Wairarapa earlier. It's a little bit bluer in this picture, but that might be the imagery we're using. In terms of the fishing, we're using a combination of gill nets, fine mesh bite nets, and G-minnow traps. And from this fishing effort that's been standardised across these 15 lakes and lagoons across the region, we're catching really good species diversity, and we're also catching a range of size classes as well. In terms of determining who has the nicest niche, I'm looking at using stable isotopes of carbon and nitrogen, and for the purposes of this talk, I've determined the nicest niche to be the biggest or the smallest niche area, and also the highest or the lowest trophic position within these communities. Looking at niche area, I'm using the statistical package CYBER and ART, which is the Bayesian framework to look at the niche area and isotopic space. And then looking at trophic position, I'm using the delta N values on my nitrogen isotopes, and I've standardised those within lakes and worked out the relative trophic position of all the fishes within those lakes, and then pulled that data across the communities. And I'll explain that a little bit more with using this biplot here. So this is just a biplot which is commonly used with isotope data. We have our delta N values on the y-axis and our delta carbon on the x-axis. And as both Mike and Simon talked about before, the known properties of isotopes allow you to examine these trophic relationships. For example, the enrichment of carbon and nitrogen through the different trophic levels. And so this is just here, I've just made up this diagram to illustrate the point. But when we get into looking at niche area, I'm using CYBER, which draws these fancy ellipses and allows me to quantify this niche space and isotopic space. Of course, I couldn't draw niches that well as CYBER does. And then in terms of my relative trophic position, it's just relying on delta N values, and I've just looked at who had the lowest delta N values within those fish communities and who had the highest, and then I've just standardised it based on that and then pulled that data together for the lakes. In terms of what fish we've been catching and our fish results, this slide is dedicated to Troy from last year's LEARNS. But these fish communities, you can see they're dominated by common bully, short-fin tuna, and also perch as well in terms of their numerical abundance. We're also catching common smelt, longfin eels, and broken goldfish in some abundance, and the lesser numbers of other species. Also had a few black flounder in these lakes. They seem to be absent from this image for some reason, and I wonder if it's about their ability to camouflage in their natural environment. Just jumping into these preliminary results again. This I'm just presenting, this box plot is showing the niche area in isotopic space. This is on the y-axis, just the species and the size classes along the x-axis. And what each bar is showing you is the range of the area that we're finding across those lakes. And then the horizontal line is the median value for that particular species or size class of those species. So in terms of the largest niche or the species that are seeing quite large variation, we have inanga up here. But I've only got 3 lakes where I had enough inanga to process these samples and use this technique on. But then we also have medium-sized rudd and large shortfin eel are also having, higher average niche areas compared to other species. In terms of the smallest niche, I've consistently seen large perch having a very small niche in isotopic space compared to other species. Moving into the trophic position and relative trophic position, again, so going from 0, being at the bottom trophic position, through to the higher trophic position within a lake. This is our species and size classes along here. Got a few more species and size classes here because I'm no longer constrained so much by having enough of a sample size to do the analysis. And the numbers at the top are just the number of fish that have gone into that particular bar graph. So if we look at the top trophic position, what we can see here is that large longfin eel, over half a metre in length, seem to be more likely to be occupying that top trophic position, but also large perch and moderate to large trout as well. For me, I was a bit surprised to see that these large shortfin eels, again over half a metre in length, weren't occupying as close high trophic positions I thought they might in terms of this analysis I've undertaken so far. If we look at who's occupying the bottom trophic position, you can see large goldfish hanging out down here, and also common bullies seem to be down here as well, but there's quite a bit of variation across those. So, I'll probably, these again are just preliminary conclusions. I've got a lot more work that I need to do to kind of tease out what exactly this means. But when we see Inanga, this is quite a large niche area, that could be related to their high mobility through these systems and the fact that they also might be moving between different lakes or systems and carrying an isotopic signature with them as well. Big shortfin eel, potentially they are having opportunities to start to exploit some fish resources or fish prey within those systems as well. So you might be seeing a larger niche area there. Similarly, medium-sized rudd might be starting to exploit some of the plants and macrophytes within those lake ecosystems. So you're seeing that kind of shift from macroinvertebrates and benthic invertebrates, including the herbivory there. Smallest niche was big perch, and that may convey some kind of specialisation on a particular prey item as well. And then if we look at top trophic position, big perch, big trout, and big longfin eel, and that might be that higher level of placidory, they're eating more fish. And then bottom trophic position, the big goldfish and common bully. So to help really tease out what that might mean, I've got quite a few additional steps to go through. I've got more lakes and more data coming in, and I'm going to be able to add to these analyses. I'm going to be able to further explore both the niche breadth or niche area and the trophic position across these lakes. And I'm going to be able to do that a lot more robustly when I get more of my data back. So I'll be able to establish proper isotopic baselines for each lake to work out a more effective trophic position than just doing a relative analysis. I'm also going to be completing some summit content analyses, so I can start trying to link that stuff back together, and I'll be utilising isotopic mixing models as well. I'd just like to thank everyone that's helped out with the field work. Doing fishing is not always easy, so lots of people help me out. The funding through the Lake Resilience Program, and also Greater Wellington Regional Council, and then support and permission from iwi and Hatu in the Wellington region, and then also DOC and BI in Wellington, which again for permits. Right, thank you.
I just noticed, did you catch any small longfin eels? I noticed it wasn't on your graph.
Yeah, just because of such high diversity from the sports and fishing, but I couldn't put everyone on that graph. We do have some lakes where we did catch quite a range of longfin eel sizes, but predominantly, if I looked across those lakes, they were mostly, larger longfin eels.
Sure, one quick question for that.
I'm just wondering, the flick flounder that disappeared, is that because they ended up in your fish tanks?
No. Stick for manifolds, I think.
Next up, as we've got the last speaker of the day, is going to give a full update from the regional council board. Thank you, Nicole. Surprise us.
Thank you. I don't have any slides for this particular quick talk, really. My name is Dennis Kubaksha. I'm a freshwater scientist at the Waikato Regional Council. And I'm representing for this particular session a group of lake scientists and managers from 11 regional councils, Ministry for the Environment and Department of Conservation. We're part of a special interest group through local government association that brings together subject matter experts from across the country to solve some common issues that you're facing. So Troy asked me to give you a brief update on what we've been talking about recently, in particular with regards to a workshop that we had yesterday where we talked about some lake restoration work that's going on around the country. Before I do that, I thought I'd take this opportunity to highlight and express my experience with the LEARNS group. I just wanted to say that I think, from what I can tell, is that LEARNS as a brand has been incredibly successful in getting all these people together in one room once a year. I don't think there's a single lake manager or scientist in the country who hasn't worked with the LEARNS project team. Every time I talk to my colleagues in other organizations, you keep hearing similar things. Yes, we've implemented some remote sensing work. We've had some modeling done with the LEARNS team. We've deployed the buoy recently, and we've got some lake management advice from those guys. So I think that this is testimony to the success of the outreach work the LEARNS group has been doing over the years. As is the case with most good and successful research programs, you generally leave the research with more questions than you were able to answer throughout the entire project time. I don't think that LEARNS is an exception here, and I guess today I'm highlighting some of the broad-scale research questions that this Lakes Focus Group has been discussing yesterday. And I can't go into a lot of detail, obviously, and I encourage you to talk to some of the people who are still around today. I might just stitch you up and make you lift your hands. Who's a member of the Lakes Focus Group, please? Please make yourself see. Alison, you too. Feel free to talk to those guys after the session or at any point in time to elaborate on some of these things. 4 major themes emerged yesterday at our workshop, and one of which was a big question that hopefully everybody's starting to think about is how to incorporate climate change effects into lake management, and what effects does climate change have on lake ecosystem processes. We feel that there are still research gaps and knowledge gaps that we need to address to better manage these lakes. More detailed questions were related in this sort of category to effects of climate variability on lake dynamics. Hopefully we can have a constructive discussion about how to address some of these knowledge gaps. Another theme was, which keeps coming up a lot, is actually that we're still looking for a comprehensive set of monitoring indicators for lake health, and the group sees a strong need to approach this in a holistic manner. We have a few tools available for lakes to assess the state and the health, but there's still quite a few knowledge gaps that we would like to fill. Things like early warning indicators come up in these conversations a lot. Are we measuring the right things to be able to understand where the lake is headed for the future? And things like forecasting tools come up a lot in these conversations as well. Another big theme that we talked about is how we can manage ecosystems that have invasive species, and how do invasive species affect lake ecosystem dynamics. Everybody appreciates the work that has been going on so far, but we keep having these discussions for various organisms that appear in our lake ecosystems. Most recently, the topic of the media has come up. We know very little about the effects of some of these invasive species on the ecosystem dynamics. Everybody in the group appreciates the hard work that LEARNS has been putting into developing restoration tools, and how the group has engaged with the end users to implement these tools. And the group feels that there is an ongoing need to jointly work with lake restoration, develop new tools, incorporate novel emerging technology into our decision-making process and how we implement these tools. In particular, in regards to the burden of the RMA requiring resource consents for a lot of these things and how some of this might be approached in a more efficient way. There's a few detailed discussions came out of this that we always have to keep in mind that we operate in a fairly limited budgets in most regions. So I suppose that some of the efficiencies need some addressing from an applied research perspective. Right, so this is my list. I hope I've given this discussion enough justice. We've talked about a lot of these things for an entire day yesterday, and I'm only really touching on some broad scale issues, obviously. So underneath each of these major themes, there were a long list of post-its. We had a post-it note session during our workshop. Many of you may be aware of these workshop tours, and we encourage you to have a chat to some of the regional council scientists. Thank you very much.
I wouldn't ask. one hanging in there. Yeah, I'm going to shift it around a little bit and talk about introducing resilience back into degraded systems. And we were running some experimental restoration looking at introducing large woody structure into lake marginal habitats of lake. So we know that indigenous fish in New Zealand are highly associated with structure, and they use it for foraging and refuge and in some cases spawning. But unfortunately, as we degrade our lakes by removing some of the riparian forests and enriching them with nutrients, we lose a lot of that structure and habitat, both from macrophytes declining and large woody debris coming in from the riparian. Now, there hasn't been so much work in New Zealand done on lakes in terms of habitat enhancement, but in North America they've sort of picked up on this largely around sports fishery species, and they've used all sorts of crazy things that they put into the lakes to add structure that bring in some of these mostly piscivorous fish. You know, in some cases it's just woody piles and brush piles, but in some cases it's these recycled plastic materials. Really that, just anything to provide hard substrate and habitat complexity. So the idea here was to look at potentially using some of these things in lakes that are degraded, and we looked at sort of candidate lakes to be lakes that are largely eutrophic lakes and have lost their macrophytes and have no real large woody debris inputs from their riparian areas. And I guess just in terms of working with partners around where they would like to see this, we wanted to make sure that there were areas where there was a high interest in trying to enhance the fisheries values, and potentially where the population had fallen from known historical levels. So the two lakes that we've worked in, one is Lake Mofitu, which is located on the west side of D'Urville Island. It's mostly a retired farmed catchment that has been deforested, and the land has reverted back through a Nature Heritage Trust to the Department of Conservation, and Doc and Matthew Puata are highly interested in restoring the tuna fishery associated with it. And Lake Wairarapa was the other lake that we picked, which obviously has some issues. They're quite contrasting lakes. Obviously Lake Wairarapa is a huge, shallow lake. Certainly we considered it to be at the high end of the challenge scale in terms of trying to keep these habitats on the lake margins, given the wave action of the lake. And as I'll show you, that there were definitely some challenges associated with that. Mofitu is a lot smaller, much smaller fish. It is actually open to some fairly significant sea breezes, and we had a couple of cyclones over the time that I did field work the first year, which presented some challenges as well, and just in terms of anchoring the structures in the lake edge. Now we wanted to keep these in an area that we could easily access them. I guess I'll talk about that a little bit later. Now the types of materials, so we were working with iwi groups. They had a strong objection to us using any recycled plastic materials. They really wanted mostly organic materials. So in the end, we actually just stuck with both lakes are really close to the coast, so we used driftwood. For Lake Wairarapa, we weren't allowed to use anything but organic materials to bind them together and put them in the lakes. That presented serious challenges, so we used hemp rope and staked them in carpet stakes, so no anchors or anything like that. For Mofi2, we were allowed to use wire, so we started using high tensile wire, but we realized that didn't actually function that well. It just couldn't handle the rock of wave action associated with the wire moving, and it broke really quickly. That was tested really, so the hemp actually worked a lot better because it's a lot more flexible. So we switched to using another type of fabric, which is a Dyneema, an engineering type, which is really high tensile and more flexible. The way that we monitored the fish, so we put these in December and January of 2018, and we've done some pre-monitoring and monitoring over 1 year of time in a sort of full batch design with controls. The methods that we used to monitor them was one using a hydroacoustic camera that can take an image over roughly around between a sort of 10 to 20 meter distance. That's a cone that would be 3 or 4 meters wide. Depending on how much resolution you want, we wanted to pick up the small fish species as well, so we tended to use a shorter path length. And we also use nets and traps in around the areas as well. So just giving you an idea of what hopefully this embedded video will work. Should run. Okay, so this is sort of the type of imagery that you get. We leave the camera out for roughly dawn to dusk 12-hour period, and we get half-hour files. Pretty memory intensive. You need to leave a laptop out of the field, but you certainly get a lot of data on it, and we were quantifying the number of fish that swim through that. So you can get a fish that swims through multiple times. That's the only problem with that method, but it gives you sort of an index of overall fish activity. On to the data now. So this is the monitoring that we did roughly a year after the structures had been in. So at our control site, which we put 0 structures versus the 2 treatments were putting either 1 structure or scaled it up to 4 structures to see if adding more habitat would bring in more fish. And that appeared to generally be the case. Obviously we didn't, but given that we've got to actually have 3 replicates and a single day each time to use the Tidzin camera, we just really, we'd be out there for months if we had too many treatments, but yeah, it looks like the more structure you add, the more fish that we're brought in. That was for nets, and for the Tidzin fish activity index. Similarly, the fish were definitely aggregating around the structure. And if we compare that to the pre-enhancement monitoring that we did at the same sites in 2017 or 2018, we saw roughly, almost a sort of doubling of fish numbers or fish activity based on what we do. So that was Mofi2. Wairarapa was a slightly different story. We really so we knew the structures were in place up until about the autumn, but the winter storms just absolutely hammered things. So all of our 4 times treatment sites, really there were only, in some cases, just 1 or 2 structures left. So we had to really just sort of eliminate analyzing that particular treatment. We didn't see as marked an effect, like a little bit of an increase in this case, in net catches from the unenhanced versus enhanced, but quite a lot of variability. I've just shown one site which was up at the very top end of the lake, which is really hit by southerly winds. Yeah, all of the structure, there was nothing left. So a real challenge if you were thinking about putting these in quite big lakes prone to wind. And the Ditton data, again, there's quite a lot of variability for Tumen, pretty similar numbers. We kind of wondered to some degree with Wairarapa being such a turbid lake. There's a lot of fish in Lake Wairarapa, but maybe the cover side of things that the structure offers is going to have less of an impact because it is such a turbid lake. So I'll just summarize the key findings of that. Essentially, we found that where we were able to keep the structures in place, there was a fairly strong, in the range of sort of 2 to 3-fold increase in fish catches and activity levels around there. For Wairarapa, that obviously was a much smaller treatment effect. The anchoring materials that we used, they really need to be flexible, and there are some challenges. It's possible that if you put the structures in deeper in the littoral zone, like outside of the real wave affected area, like we needed to actually put them in reasonably shallow so we could use the camera and access the sites quite easily. But if that wasn't the case, then potentially you could avoid some of that, but you'd obviously need to use anchoring to keep them in. And I guess that there's still a bit of a question around whether these devices are acting to just aggregate fish, whether they're fads, or whether this really will ultimately, if you added a lot of structure, like for MoFu2, we actually did enhance a fairly large area of the shoreline, whether that will increase the carrying capacity of the population or whether it's aggregating fish. Now we do have 2 control sites that were monitoring fish, and we didn't see that suddenly there was a huge decline in the abundances at those control locations versus the areas that we've enhanced. So, but yeah, I think probably more monitoring is needed for that. But ultimately, really, we wanted to get something that an EV group or a community could actually take up and potentially do themselves, and without requiring huge heavy equipment. So that could be a real sort of community-based enhancement project, and I think the results are reasonably positive for that. And just acknowledging a few people, and I'll take any questions. You can watch Wairarapa while I take any questions. Yeah, well, there's none around, and then I need an awfully large equipment to get it in and hold it. So yeah, kind of limited to do that.
We've got a mine that's filling up of the lake, Chimney Lake was this mine, and this pine forest being flooded by the lake is rising, and we've been cutting out because of the nutrients that will be put in the water.
Yeah.
How does that balance out the traps with the need in the outlet with the fish habitat?
So you're driving it, what are you taking out, sorry, again?
It's part of the naturally rising and flooding forest.
Yeah.
Pine forest. Plus
Yeah, like,
vegetation.
I wouldn't say that that it would certainly decompose over time and add a small amount of nutrient, but really the habitat values of it are probably pretty high. So, or if it's used for boating or something like that, I guess it would be a navigational method, but not necessarily remove it.
Thank you very much, Dave. As a slight deviation of the program, I'd like to call on David Hamilton now. David Hamilton, who most of you will know, the original PI on this Lakes Research Lake Resilience work, and he's just going to run a real quick survey, 5 minutes, and then we'll continue with the scheduled program.
Thanks, Maurice. And what I need you to do is actually to look at your phones, your phones are live, and you can write in order to do the survey. Laptops are even better. Here would be what I do. Okay, so what I need you to do with your phone or on your laptop is go to mentimedia.com. I see a lot of people who either don't have a phone or maybe idle. This is very dependent on your ability to actually get your phone out and participate in the survey. Otherwise, it's just not going to work. What happened there? Very dependent on your ability to get Okay, so I need you to go to Mentimedia, and I need you to need you to put that number up. It's 97, 92. Okay, so don't race too far ahead, and we can see which of these is going to actually win out. This is just to get you used to the process. So if you have got your phone, hopefully you've caught up with we're about to be out. Now, I don't actually know the right answer to this because I know it's a little bit equivocal, right? a few years ago, GNS, and maybe Marcus maybe goes here, but looked at the GNS survey, what to do a few years ago, and said that that was actually maybe deeper than Oroka. Okay. So the winner is, so, if you wouldn't mind just entering your affiliation, 0 is regional council, district council, or city council. I apologise if you're uncategorised under others. What you voted? Quickly, why did you come to the Loon Symposium today? Rank which one of those you Okay, so it looks like needed to escape work for the day. We're actually ranked a little bit lower. Okay, I'll move you along. Sorry, time's limited, so I don't give too much to others. How would you describe your knowledge of the Lakes 380 research program? I think this is relevant because it's a program that hasn't been going long, and just to sort of gauge some level of interest and knowledge of the program. Fantastic, thank you. A little bit about Takiwa before today. Oh, that's quite interesting. I'm not aware of it, so might be a message in there. Word cloud, so if you wouldn't mind, this one I'll just a little bit more time, but if you can use keywords up to 3 to say what the Lakes Resilience Program means to you. So you can use perhaps 1 or 2 keywords, what lake resilience actually means. Awesome, thank you very much. And what's the best way to share the research outputs from the Lake Resilience Program? research prioritised? Now some sort of cutting questions, really. We get down to the next two slides with the sort of fairly time questions, I guess. Another one similar to long single line. Nearly there. Climate change, this was good. Seems to be coming up pretty strongly. Number one's pretty self-explanatory. Polarity there in the top two questions. All right, the last keywords. And just an important, I guess I'll make it the last one. I think I have one more from Dennis's presentations. I cut it shorter now. I'm scared I've already scared us time, but proceeds. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'll feed have the results, we can do a little bit of analytical work in the results. I'll feed that back to Grant Tenborough and he can distribute it with the other material arising from the meeting. Thank you.
All right, our next presentation is Nick Lake.
Thanks, Maurice. 2 seconds left for my talk, so thanks very much. I was wondering on the previous slide who Edna was, realised that was eDNA. Got a rather sorry story to tell you today about a formerly pristine lake that you may not be aware of. So this is a project that was looking at the exotic fish community of Lake Rotokawa, which is a formerly pristine lake in the Auckland region. Right. So this is a project that was funded out of the National Environment Targeted Rate for the Auckland Council. One of the aspects of that program is freshwater biosecurity, and the biosecurity program for freshwater is looking at undertaking pest control in lakes Rotokawa and Tomarata in the Auckland region. So first we look at what pests exist, both exotic fish and plants, understand the ecology of exotic pests in these lakes to direct targets of control and eradication, and to then undertake, if possible, control or eradication of pests. Fortunately for this lake, there is quite a reasonable amount of previous fishery data, dating from way back, starting in the 1980s. Primarily this was Fish and Game doing annual surveys of trout for open condition because it was a put-and-take trout fishery, and that information has been very useful subsequently, because up until around about 1999 there were no exotic fish found in any of those surveys that were done. Subsequent to that, in the 2000s, there was further surveys that Fish and Game did. NIWA did a study in 2003, and we have done studies in 2007, 2011, and now 2019. Those of you who are familiar where Lake Rotokawa is, it was formerly called Lake Otaka. It's on South Kaikoura Head, northwest of Auckland. Here, and is one of the series of North Island West Coast sand dune lakes. It's a reasonably large lake, 110 hectares, and reasonably deep. Sits right in the middle of South Kaikoura Peninsula. The area of 110 hectares, it's 27 metres deep. As I said before, it's an isolated sand dune lake. It's been a put-and-take trout fishery since very early on. Started stocking in 1915, stocked through the 1950s, and then there was a hiatus in trout stocking. There's no natural spawning opportunities for rainbow trout in the lake. Stocking started again in 1980. Historically, the lake's been oligotrophic with a mean sea depth of around about 7.5 metres. So it's a really nice, pristine sand dune lake, similar to the Kaiwi lakes if you've ever been up there. Historically, the biodiversity values of the lake have a reasonably significant, regionally significant trout fishery, basically only where within an easy drive of Auckland where you could go and catch trout. It had an extremely abundant kura, and one of the reasons I'm really interested in this lake is because this is where I first started freshwater diving. So we used to go there in the 1980s, and the purpose for going there was to take photos of these legions of kura that would march across the bottom. Also has a really significant population of kakaki or kaio, freshwater mussel, very abundant common bully, and also contains the dwarf inaya, which does not naturally occur in the lake, but was actually introduced there as trout fodder from lakes further north in the 1980s. Other than trout, no exotic species were recorded in the lake prior to 1999, but perch were illegally introduced in 1999. And as we'll see from the data, possibly other species were introduced at the same time. there was a certain person who was around at the time who was complicit in introducing exotic fish to lakes in the Auckland Waikato region, and this is possibly an opportunity where he just thought, well, throw a whole lot of stuff in there and just see what takes. But since that date, not only has perch been found, but also goldfish, rudd, tench, and gambusia. The lake is starting to suffer from water quality issues. So as I said before, it was historically around about 7.5 metres secchi depth. That's now climbing and climbing quite significantly in recent years. This is a photo that I took in Lake Rotokawa in 2003. You couldn't find any kura on the lake bottom by that stage, and when you went for a dive, you just had these enormous schools of large perch kind of following you around with a very hungry look on their face. So we carried out a fish survey in March this year using a suite of different techniques to try and track a range of different species that might be in the lake. So we kind of a shotgun approach with gill nets, fight nets, minnow traps, and also did some snorkel surveys. And these are the fish that we caught. I won't go into the detail of that, we'll go through them species by species. So firstly, perch. Perch are extremely numerous in the lake now. As is expected, different gill mesh net sizes were highly size selective for different size ranges of perch, but as you can see, the catch rates can be pretty high. Interestingly, over time, perch numbers have generally increased through those gill net surveys since the fish were introduced. And now, as is common with perch populations, the population seems to be quite stunted. Early on, catch rates did get relatively large fish, of up to 400 millimetres. That was relatively common, and we only caught 2 fish in that larger size category. So the population appears to be stunted now compared to previous years, as has occurred in other perch populations, such as Lake Cave we heard about earlier today. We found the same thing in Glory Reservoir as well. Tench seem to have increased in abundance in the lake. We put 72 in our survey. Gill netting was less size selective for tench. Over time, tench numbers appear to have increased. Tench are a very large bodied fish, and ecologically you can pretty much equate tench with carp. So I think this is a real significant problem for the lake. They occupy pretty much the same ecological niche as carp. They're very large bodied fish. They stir up sediment. We found a lot of pockmarked holes in the sediment, which were presumably from carp feeding, so I think this is a real problem. Interestingly, as the tench population has increased, other exotic species seem to have declined, so goldfish seem to have declined over time, although obviously with any fishery data, the numbers are pretty patchy. It's no longer a good trout fishery anymore. So Fish and Game were regularly monitoring lake for trout growth conditions. So these are the sizes of 2-year-old trout, right through all the surveys that they did. When perch got in the lake and trout conditions seemed to be suffering, they decided to stock 2-year-old trout rather than 1-year-old trout. But those fish suffered from poor growth rates as well. We only caught 4 trout in our survey. These were fairly legal despite the fact that they were 4-year-old trout. So basically there are no decent trout fishery values provided by that lake anymore. Rudd, although rudd had been recorded in the lake, we didn't catch any in our survey or in the previous survey in 2011, and they've only ever been caught in very small numbers, sort of only 1, 2, 3 fish in each survey. So not quite sure why this lake does not seem to provide good opportunities for rudd. There's abundant macrophytes in the lake that rudd would like to eat. So that's a question as to why rudd haven't seemed to have taken in this lake. But gambusia certainly have become extremely abundant. They were reported in the lake prior to 2004, but the numbers in comparable survey techniques have increased exponentially since 2004. What about the native biodiversity values of the lake? Common woolly numbers have exponentially declined. Dwarf inanga numbers have exponentially declined. In our survey this year, we only caught 2 dwarf inanga from the same fight net, one fish on 2 different nights in the same location. and didn't observe any historical surveys where in the past we've seen schools of these things swimming around in the reeds. So Gorpionanga is probably functionally extinct in the lake. Kura, interestingly we caught reasonable numbers of Kura this time, although Kura numbers generally have declined over time. The population seems to have stabilised, and one hypothesis is that because the perch population is now relatively stunted without these very large individuals, and perch are quite gate limited, that may be providing an ability for Kura to escape predation. And some of the individuals that we caught were absolutely massive, and we also saw them roaming around on dives as well. So in summary then, as far as the alien fishes in Lake Rotatoa go, perch and possibly also rudd, jet, goldfish and gambusia illegally introduced about 1999, possibly all at the same time, only recorded prior to that date. Perch and tench seem to have come to dominate the fish biomass, although the perch population now appears to be stunted. Presumably they were introduced to provide a coarse fishery. They're no longer providing a suitable coarse fishery because there's no decent perch, no perch of decent size in the lake for people to catch. Goldfish and rudd have declined in recent years. That's a good thing, given the high native plant values in Lake Rotatoa, but gambusia are extremely abundant now. And trout growth rates are extremely poor and no longer provide fishery values, and I don't think Fish and Game have any idea to keep stocking the lake because it's no longer a big trout fishery. And although we have all the previous historical fishery data, worth bearing in mind that planning these sort of things need to be very consistent in terms of methodology and gear type, because certain species follow certain methodologies, and even things like gill net mesh sizes have to be very carefully planned in order to catch certain species and certain cohorts of species, in order to provide consistent data that you can then compare through time if you're looking at changes in the fish community through time. In terms of the biodiversity values, common bully have declined. Gorpionanga have declined and may be functionally extinct. Kura have declined, the population may be stable now, thanks to the stunting of the perch population. And interestingly, for the Kākei population, we observed that there seems to have been a dramatic mortality event, but we're not quite sure what caused that. So outstanding questions then, why have rudd in particular seemingly never established properly, and why are goldfish seemingly in decline despite abundant food resources for those species? Is that perhaps a recruitment limitation? Will tench continue to increase as the lake becomes progressively more eutrophic? And this is like a positive feedback system. The tench, because they affect water quality, that therefore makes the lake more eutrophic, that therefore increases the opportunities for recruitment, because tench larvae being very small, they don't do well in oligotrophic systems. So as the tench become or increase or decrease water quality, that may actually improve their recruitment opportunities and allow the population to expand. So and then if this happens and the lake becomes more eutrophic, will that then assist in the re-establishment of rudd and goldfish? And also, in order to understand the ecology of the system and to look at potential control options, we need to understand spatial and temporal habitat use by perch and tench in order to offer options for targeted control. What are the options to eradicate alien fish from Rotatoa? Rotenone is an option. I calculated it would take 50 tonnes of cube root powder. Probably not a viable option, although lakes larger than this have been done overseas. And not likely to eliminate the least sensitive species. Goldfish and tench are probably very, well, goldfish certainly are very resistant to rotenone, and tench probably are as well because they're very obviously tolerant. Fishing is probably not much of an option given the size and depth of the lake, and it's also difficult access. New technologies, GMOs, sterile males, disease vectors, viruses, that sort of thing are possible. They're single species rather than multi-species solutions. Nutrient management, potentially to negate things like supplemental recruitment. So by improving water quality, maybe you can reduce the recruitment. If you're fishing at the top end for the adults and you're trying to negate recruitment at the other end, then that might be a method for integrated pest management to try and reduce the species in this lake. Just acknowledgement, Auckland Council for funding the study. Auckland Waikato Fishing Game for support and historical data. landowner for lake access. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Nick. It's time for a quick question when I change over the slideshow.
Probably very not PC question, would you consider the use of process?
It's a very large lake, it's a very big bomb. Although there is actually a bombing range just up the road from here. So yeah. It worked extremely well for Lake Tarawera. No, not Lake Tarawera, Lake Ramahana. That was a very big bomb, and that used everything in Lake Ramahana. So there is a precedent for that.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Kumachi of the Waikato Regional Council. Thank you, Boris. I'm running a slightly different to my previous talk. I'm also part-time staff at the University Financial Alerts program. So today I'll be talking to you about a framework that I think can be useful for developing a consistent and systematic selection process for beautification management and selective restoration tools. We'd like to acknowledge, first of all, numerous people who've been very helpful and given valuable input into this presentation. And then those are also people who have helped me over the years to better understand lake restoration and how to get from a ground lake like this to a more clear lake like that. I still have a question mark on a lot of these things. Kevin is the critical step leader and has given me the opportunity to work on this project. David and Jonathan have provided me with very detailed literature reviews on lake restoration tools and various aspects which I've incorporated into this framework. And Paula, who's a colleague at the Waikato Regional Council, who has given me new insights into the complexities of lake management and restoration, which I understand is very rarely actually a scientific exercise. Okay, so the development and application of lake restoration tools has a very long history in limnology. And over the last few decades, numerous tools have been developed to combat beautification. I won't go through a whole list of different restoration tools here, and I encourage you to read those literature reviews that I mentioned. Most of the time, or hopefully all of the time, restoration activities are founded in sound ecological theory and principles of restoration ecology. However, and very unfortunately, the entire discipline has been excessively burdened by trial and error approaches. And while there's a lot of value in those trial and error approaches to learn, those findings can often be difficult to transfer to other systems. So that means really that we have a very detailed understanding for very few lakes around the country and internationally, but we seem to know very little about lake response to restoration for the majority of lakes. In those sorts of cases, the framework can help to integrate and synthesize the information and provide a more generalized approach to selecting restoration tools. Of course, during any restoration activity, there are multiple factors that influence the decision-making process. And for today, I'm really only talking about some of the lake restoration aspects. Okay, so if I had to categorize restoration methods into broad categories, I think most of them would fall into either preventative approaches or remedial approaches. I haven't incorporated a lot of preventative approaches into my framework yet, but I've been able to incorporate many of the remedial actions and restoration tools into the framework, which can be further categorized into physical, chemical, and biological restoration tools. And you know that, and you will see that a lot of these categories have a lot of different tools sitting underneath them, which all act differently in regards to combating beautification. To introduce the framework to you today, I will focus on this part of the restoration toolbox. Okay, so this could be controversial or not, I'm not sure. I think in order to evaluate the restoration tools for a given lake, we also need to understand the boundaries and the limits of our current capacity to actually restore lakes. Ecological theory and restoration ecology suggests to us that the concept of reference condition can be a useful tool to better understand where ecosystems have come from, to set benchmarks that can be used to develop very specific targets. Restorability is a derivative of the reference condition, and it's a concept that has been used in other ecosystem types such as wetlands, grasslands, and forests. And if we subscribe to this premise of restorability, we should be able to calculate or derive a restorability index for New Zealand lakes, or for lakes in general. I've used a very simple model to calculate such a restorability index, which incorporates two basic aspects. One is the current estimated trophic level index, and you're looking at data for 1,030 lakes here. That's the piece of work that we're currently writing up. And it also takes into account the estimated historical or reference trophic level index. A value of 1 would indicate that the lake is likely to be responsive to interventions given the restoration tool package that we have available. A restoration index or restorability index value of 0 would indicate that the lake is unlikely to be responsive to interventions. And this is usually a point where people get a bit skeptical. The model takes into account lakes that are still in pristine condition, and those are all the purple sort of looking dots on the left-hand side of that scatter plot. Next value, and I'm not suggesting here in this talk at all or ever that these lakes are unrestorable, but I think we need to acknowledge that even moderately degraded lakes require very substantial interventions to hold further degradation or to assist in the improvements in water quality. Right, you see the importance of this index later on. Let's have a talk about how this framework is set up, and I'm introducing this to you. This framework is a little bit more complex than what I'm able to show you today. We're looking at 40 different restoration actions and tools that come out of the literature reviews and the Lake Restoration Handbook, and we will be building up the framework out from the bottom up. Several lake characteristics ultimately determine which tools might be applicable and suitable for a given lake, and this is a subset of the lake characteristics that can be incorporated in the framework. For example, very easy things. Some tools may only be applicable in small to moderately large lakes. Other tools may only be applicable in lakes that actually seasonally stratify or become an oxide during summer stratification. Other lakes may be particularly prone to wind-driven resuspension, which often precludes the use of certain restoration tools such as sediment capping or geotechnical engineering, those sort of things. So very basic things. And there's a few more sitting underneath that. I've also given consideration to what I'm calling a target attribute here. Several restoration methods are specifically designed to target, for example, total phosphorus concentrations in the lake water column. Other tools might be particularly designed for reducing the standing stock of algae or cyanobacteria without really reducing nutrient concentrations. And the way I've set up the framework for now is that the framework will give preference to tools that can target more than one attribute. Based on David Hamilton's literature review, we also have a much better understanding now about the relative cost, effectiveness, and skill requirements for implementing those restoration tools. And I was curious to understand how these factors might influence our selection for different tools in a given lake. If the overall aim is to prioritize lake interventions and restoration tools, not lakes, then we need to account for the overall restorability that needs to be balanced against the restoration method assessment. And that means if a lake has a low restorability index value, the framework currently set up, in the way it's currently set up, will suggest probably to us that we should consider other alternatives that we haven't captured in our restoration toolbox just yet. So there's various methods and algorithms out there to solve complex priority calculations. All of them have their disadvantages and advantages. I've chosen to use the analytic hierarchy process. If you're interested in that, I can give you a rundown later. I also wanted to use an algorithm that can account for unique combinations of lake-specific characteristics, because we need unique combinations of solutions for every lake. Also wanted to look at trade-offs between different criteria. For example, I've included cost, effectiveness, and skill requirements in such a way that the ideal method, and you can correct me on that, would be the cheapest method, the most effective method that doesn't require a lot of technical skills to implement. Of course, the reality is that all of the methods I'm considering today will lie somewhere along this spectrum. And you can shuffle that sort of stuff around as you wish if you are looking at site-specific considerations. I was curious about the logical internal consistency as well. For example, if the framework suggests method A is better than method B, and method B is better than method C, then logically, of course, method C can never be better than method A. I hope that makes sense. And this is easy to trace when you're looking at 3 different methods, but if you're looking at 14 methods with more than a dozen of different criteria, it becomes quite a complex exercise, and the mathematics can help us to trace the logic. So the way the framework is set up is now for this national scale set, national set of lakes for 1,000 lakes. And if you want to apply this at a site-specific scale, you may already have a predetermined set of selection criteria that you want to include here, or you already have decided on a certain type of interventions, for example, chemical restoration methods, and you would like to compare different sediment capping materials amongst each other. The framework should be able to accommodate that sort of approach as well. So just to remind you, if you're looking at the output, I'm only giving you a couple of brief examples here. The selection criteria were based on a national scale assessment that we were able to derive consistently across all of these 1,000 lakes. And this is a list of all the restoration methods that we're looking at. And the example output here is for Lake Okaro, which is a small monomictic lake in the Bay of Plenty region. And the framework suggests to us that these stratification, sediment capping, and oxygenation would be the most suitable chemical restoration methods for us to investigate further. I think those results are intuitive. The lake is eutrophic and undergoes seasonal acidification where the bottom water becomes hypoxic, undergoes phosphorus release from the bottom sediment, so the framework captures that quite nicely. The lake is also deep enough so that wind-driven resuspension isn't a major issue in this particular lake, so methods like sediment capping come out score quite highly in this framework. Another example is Lake Whangapai, which is a shallow lake here in the Waikato region, for which the framework would suggest to us that none of the existing restoration tools in our current assessment here would be suitable candidate restoration tools in this particular lake, and we should be probably investigating other alternatives. And that's sort of a big black box, obviously, at the moment. At the same time, that's the scope for further improving the framework to capture some of these lakes. So the result is actually intuitive. The lake is extremely eutrophic and has a low value has a low score for the restorability index. The lake is also extremely shallow and is prone to resuspension. So destratification or even sediment capping is rated very low in this framework. If you don't subscribe to this concept of restorability, you can probably ignore this if you're looking at site-specific output, at which point we may even could look at method flushing, which the framework rates comparably high for this particular lake. And I think this is an intuitive output as well, because this is a river-run lake that is connected to the Waikato River, and there could be sufficient water volume to flush the lake if this is such a drastic option that we would like to consider. If you are looking at site-specific output from this national model, you're probably wondering about some of the rank orders here. All these values are priority values, and they add up to 100%. So this does not mean if you implement all of these methods, you get 100% towards the target. This is not what the framework really does. And the site-specific selection criteria might give you a more refined list of priorities for your lake. Right, so I'll race through this really quickly. I haven't shown you the underlying mathematics, which I've spent most of my time on, and there's 2,000 lines of code, so that's why I presented some of these boxes. I'm still hoping that I've shown you that the framework could be used to support systematic and more than anything, consistent selection process for picking restoration tools to combat eutrophication. The national scale analysis in its current form has shown me that the current restoration toolbox may only be applicable to a small subset of lakes that are moderately degraded with regards to eutrophication. And of course, some of the underlying functions and calculations required a number of assumptions to be made, but I think the national model still leads to reasonable lake-specific output, some of which I would like to test in the future. And there's a few things I think I would like to do with the framework in the future. I think we can develop we can test the framework at a regional site-specific scale with multiple stakeholders and site-specific selection criteria. I think it would be useful to integrate integrate the framework into modeling with regards to better understand some of the underlying nitty-gritty calculations needed to really deploy those techniques, and also to investigate potential sequencing of interventions. I would like to develop a case study for a multi-stress environment. For example, what would be the interaction between petfish and the way the framework handles those method selections. I've started working on a flexible graphical user interface, which I think could be important in the future if people want to give this framework a go as a tool to start some initial screening of different restoration tools for their particular level. Thank you very much.
If there's one quick question, we can take it, but otherwise I'd like to call on Pete Gerber to give the last talk of the session of the day.
So this may be under your other alternatives, but a lot of shallows like cataways suffered from the first problem that they were lower. And so is increasing depth ever considered as restoration reserve?
Yeah, so water level management wasn't included specifically in this national scale assessment. Well, first of all, water level management is really a good tool to improve water quality directly for eutrophication indicators. It can be, it's one of those tools that I would probably include in a lake specific assessment if water level management was a serious consideration.
Thank you. Pete Gerber of NEWA just across the road here, sitting in the next talk.
Thanks for having on for the last talk. So this one is about Lake Orfema, which is in about 300 hectares, so it's towards the south end of the North Island, and it's fairly shallow. It's about maximum 2 meters deep, and this lake is hypertrophic, so high concentrations of chlorophyll and nitrogen and phosphorus, and this is in spite of nutrient reduction of the nutrient load that was carried out about 30 years ago by diverting sewage that used to go into the lake. And so this talk will be about the changes that occurred over the past 30 years, so since the sewage diversion. And I will discuss the budgets, or the water budget and the nutrient budgets, and including the nutrient loads into the lake. And I will talk about the extreme seasonality of nutrient concentrations, and lastly the internal load and denitrification as estimated from the mass balance of nutrients. So first, the changes in nutrient concentrations over the past 3 decades. So this compares, on the left are the summertime data, and on the right the wintertime data, and it compares the blue bars are the nutrients before the diversion, which occurred which was done in 1987, and then the red bars are the 1 year of data immediately after the diversion, and the last data are the mean of 4 recent years. So there was an immediate improvement in the lake after the diversion, and but not so much change since then. And so in chlorophyll did improve since over the past 3 decades, but nutrients did not change all that much, and nitrate, so inorganic nitrogen is mostly nitrate, increased massively, and so it's hundreds of milligrams per cubic meter, and even though it's still about 10 times less of the concentration that it reaches in the wintertime. So in the wintertime, the nitrate increased as well, and chlorophyll decreased like it did in the summer, and phosphate decreased as well. This is about the seasonality, so it shows the extreme differences in concentrations of nitrogen and phosphate in winter and summer. The top graph is for the total nutrients, so it shows the Nitrogen, total nitrogen is peaking in the winter and phosphorus peaks in the summertime. The next graph down is for the dissolved inorganic nutrients, and so it's showing a similar pattern but even more distinct. And this pattern is not shown in the lower graph, which is the lows into the lake, and so that pattern is not there at all. So those patterns are explained, must be explained by processes occurring within the lake, and that's internal loading during the summer resulting in high phosphorus concentrations, and during the summer also the denitrification is low, so it explains low nitrogen, especially low nitrate concentration during summer, which then rebound during the winter. And also the ratios of the total nitrogen and phosphorus are explained by this. So these ratios are huge in the tributaries, in several hundred, and in the lake the ratios almost never are as high as in the tributaries. It's maximum about 100 during the winter, and then it decreases to the summer. In the summer it drops below 10, down to about 5, and so again this is because of internal loading of phosphorus and loss of nitrogen by denitrification. And so during the summertime, 30 years ago, it was shown that the lake became nitrogen limited then, but that might no longer be the case, and as suggested by cyanobacteria, we still bloom in the summer because of this internal loading of phosphorus at that time, but these are almost all microcystis, which is not a nitrogen fixer. So it would appear that the lake might not be nitrogen limited at this time, and that's because of this massive increase of nitrate during the summer. So nitrogen might not be limiting anymore. The next bit is about the water budget. So there is, for this lake, there's actually quite a lot of good data available, more than 4 years of monthly data of flows and concentrations in 8 surface inflows, and that covers pretty much all the surface inflow to the lake. And however, there is also a lot of groundwater going into the lake, and so that you find out by calculating the water budget. The water budget is shown on the top is here. That's the total inflows, the surface inflows plus groundwater plus rainfall on the lake. So groundwater was measured, was estimated by difference using this budget. And so those 3 things together should then be equal to what leaves the lake to the outlet and what's lost by evaporation plus the change in lake level, lake volume. Lake volume is relatively small, and so on an annual basis you can ignore it. You see in this graph, it shows the water budget for the 4 individual years, that groundwater is similar in quantity to the surface inflows. Okay, so the next is the loads in both in the tributaries and in the groundwater. So for the groundwater we also have nutrient concentrations from several boreholes in the catchment. So this shows the loads. On the top shows the nitrogen, both in the inflows in the groundwater. It also shows atmospheric deposition loads, which are relatively small, just a few percent in the budget. Okay, so the next one, this slide shows the concentrations, the average concentrations in the surface inflows. And so, especially for nitrogen, this is massive. It's about 8 times higher than the mean in pasture streams. And so this is data from a paper by Scott Larned. The mean, countrywide mean for pasture streams and on it's about 8 times higher, and that's mostly nitrate. It's like 99% nitrate. And for phosphorus, the difference is about 3 to 4 times as high. And of course, the difference with native lake copper class is even much bigger. Okay, so the internal load can be calculated using this simple Follow-Meyer equation, which is usually used to predict the lake concentration, the lake phosphorus concentration from the load going into the lake. But you can turn this equation around, and instead you put in the observed phosphorus concentration in the lake into this equation, and then you get out the load to the lake. And so this is then the total load, which is the sum of the external load plus the gross internal load. And since we know the external load, I showed that in the previous slide, we can by difference get the internal load. In the same way, you can also calculate gain unification from the mass balances of phosphorus and nitrogen, and I'll be happy to explain that after the talk. This equation. And that gain unification estimated in that way agrees fits quite nicely with chlorophyll. So the more eutrophic a lake is, the higher the gain unification that occurs in the lake. So this combines data from the Bay Plenty lakes and Taupo and Orofenua as way there. So this is then the total nutrient budget, the top again for nitrogen. So it shows the total external load and the nutrients that are leaving the lake through the outflow, and the amount of nitrogen that is lost by gain unification. For phosphorus, it also shows the gross internal load, which is about 4 times higher than the external load. And that was also confirmed by calculations from the rate of increase of phosphorus during the summer, and taking into account the loss of phosphorus by flushing. And so that the load calculated, internal load calculated in that way was agreed. And you see that on average the amount of nutrients retained was negative over these 4 years, and so that means that more nutrients, more phosphorus was released from the sediment than got buried in the sediment. This shows the same for by year, and so it shows that gain unification slightly increased over these 4 years, and that's explained by the increase in the nitrogen load. And on the other hand, the phosphorus internal load was highest in 2016. So this compares the phosphorus DRP with oxygen and pH. So there was a good correlation between DRP concentrations and low oxygen concentrations. So phosphorus is released from the sediment when oxygen gets low, and especially iron-bound phosphorus gets released from sediment. Phosphorus can also get released from sediment when pH gets very high, but the correlation between the DRP and the pH was not as good as with oxygen. The average phosphorus concentration in the lake was about 1.5 gram per kilo. And so from this is the mean from 17 sites, so we collected sediment cores all over there, all over the lake. And so 1.5 gram, that's actually not very high. If you compare that with the 12 lakes from the Bay of Plenty, there are quite a few lakes that have more phosphorus in the sediment. And that includes, for instance, Albertina, Tararira. So this demonstrates that the amount of phosphorus in the sediment is not really what drives the eutrophication of the lake. Other things are important. So first of all, the bottom water has to become anoxic to get this phosphorus out of the sediment. Secondly, of course, in shallow lakes like Orofenua, when this internal loading occurs, that will have way more effect than in deep lakes. And the third thing is organic matter is also important, so that drives oxygen consumption and therefore anoxia, and so that organic matter is relatively high in Lake Orofenua. And the next thing that is important is the fractions of phosphorus. What is phosphorus bound to? So this shows 6 different fractions in the phosphorus in the surface layer, so ranging from refractory phosphorus to loosely bound, easily releasable phosphorus. It also includes the pH-sensitive phosphorus, so that phosphorus is released when pH gets high, and so that's typically phosphorus bound to aluminum, and bound also iron, phosphorus bound to iron, and that which gets released when anoxia occurs. And so those last 4 fractions are the easily releasable fractions, and they amount to a total of 73%.
That's relatively high compared with other lakes. And another thing that's important is the ratio of aluminum to iron. When this is above 3, then anoxia typically does not result in much release of phosphorus. And because it would mean that there is relatively little iron, and iron is what, when it is bound to phosphorus, is what releases it when there is anoxia. So Orofenola plate is placed up here, so that's because there's so it has a low aluminum to iron ratio. So in other words, it has a lot of iron, and on the y-axis is the release rate per day, and so we measure this in experiments. And so a lot of iron in Lake Orofenola compared with these Bay 20 lakes again. And so in other words, this binds a lot of phosphorus, and we see a nice correlation with phosphorus. And this is released when the bottom water becomes anoxic. Okay, last couple of slides. So this shows that internal loading and also dehumidification were highest in 2016. Dehumidification here is as a percentage of the nitrogen load. And that was in that same year, low oxygen conditions were most frequent as well, and the temperature was on average highest during the summer. Of course, temperature also drives anoxia, so temperature affects both phosphorus release, internal load, and dehumidification. And that is worrisome because temperature increased, the climate has warmed, so this is Levin is the city right next to the lake. And over the past 27 years, the annual mean temperatures increased by more than a degree, and the summer temperatures increased even more. So I expect that in a warming climate, this lake will deteriorate even further, especially if the load concentrations of nutrients in the tributaries remain as high as they are now. So just wrapping up, internal load and dehumidification cause these extreme differences between summer and winter in the concentrations in the nutrients. And less nitrogen exits the lake than enters it because of dehumidification. And more phosphorus exits the lake than enters it because of internal loading. This internal loading is depends on anoxia and organic matter, and it correlates better with low oxygen conditions than with pH. It's also iron and the type of phosphorus fractions are important, and of course depth, as I explained, and temperature. Temperature and anoxia are also important for dehumidification, but of course also the amount of nitrogen that is supplied will determine the rate of dehumidification. There was a lot of labile, mobile phosphorus in the sediment, and internal loading of this phosphorus Drysian bacteria blooms every summer. However, these were not fixes, and the lake does not seem to be getting nitrogen limited in the summer anymore. So these are my thanks. Organization and people I would like to thank, and happy for any questions.
To the airport, that you feed for any questions afterwards in the foyer. I'd like you to join me in thanking all the speakers again today. I think we've had a great, fantastic range of topics. One person I'd like to thank in particular, without whom this would have not gone forward at all, or probably as smoothly as it did, and that's Grant Temporal. He's almost single-handedly organized this whole event, and thank you very much, Grant. Finally, to close the day, I'd like to ask Maui Hudson to give us a farewell.
Saw Maui outside mucking around.
But just like to refer knowledge in Detroit for a good symposium, and as we open our Hollywood Karakia. But before I close it, I just wanted to share a Tungiwa proverb from the second Māori king, Kingi Tāwhiao, who was the Māori king during the land wars and during the land confiscations of the 1860s. The university that the land that we're on is actually confiscated the land from him and his tribe. And the proverb to his people during those turbulent times goes, Te kuna waiwo, te waiwo rona, e mana wa apinua, e kore i e. When you translate that, it means the spring of life within the heart of Papatūānu. If we work together, the water, the life will never diminish. The water, the people will never run dry. And that's what the symposium was about today. It was about working together. Ka te rā o tātou hui, i kareke te whakamutinga o tātou hui. Kia tātou, kia tātou katoa, kia tātou mui reiti, kia aroa me tātou ngā taitana. Wairua tātia, amen. Kia ora everyone. Have a safe journey home.
Thank you, man.
Yes.